Hi everyone, welcome to the first of hopefully many Introverted Indies. So today we're running the first of what will be two on the self-publishing journey, because it transpires that a lot of indie authors want to talk about their journey. So I'm going to come right in here and hand over to Dan if you want to start off the introductions. Tell us about
Yeah,
yourself.
sure. My name is Dan Hoskins. I write as D.H. Hoskins. I'm an indie fantasy author, so I have published my debut book was The Council of Athesia, and it came out last June. And it's a political fantasy, so it really focuses on this political intrigue and like backstabbing and backroom deals that happen at this council that occurs after kind of the typical like massive fantasy war. So that was my debut, and it's the first in a series. And I have the second book coming out in March. And I'm based in just outside of Boston, so Massachusetts based.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, we've got a lot of people from different places here. So who wants to go next? MJ?
Yeah, so my name's MJ Etkind, actually also in Boston, right in the city. I have one book out and one book coming out in March. So my first book, Dishwasher Safe, is a romance about a mermaid who falls for a dishwasher, the guy, not the appliance. And then my second book comes out March 25th, and it's called The Witch of Wall Street, and it's about an actual witch who works in finance and has to answer some really ethical questions about capitalism while falling for her kind of former high school rival who works at a nonprofit for affordable housing that her investment bank just so happens to be trying to undercut. So I'm really excited about that.
That sounds amazing, thank you. So Nick, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nick McPherson. I'm a fantasy sci-fi writer. My debut novel came out in 2022, Chosen the New Order. It's a story about three kids who get pulled into an alternate realm and dealing with the ramifications of their arrival. And then it's part of a series. The second book just came out in January. It's called Fractured Sky. Don't know how many books I'm going to do in the series. I'm kind of just letting it go where it goes. But yeah, I'm in the Cleveland area, Cleveland, Ohio.
Cool, thank you, Nick.
And I have three toddlers and a newborn, so got my hands full.
Lots to juggle, yeah.
Yeah.
Jen, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Jen Sinclair. I write women's fiction, book club fiction, whatever we want to call it. My first book debuted in September about an artist who is kind of at a crossroads after she loses the ability to paint. Everything that she's faced in life is kind of blown up in her face. Every choice she's made is kind of blown up in her face. She finds out her husband's basically got them on the brink of bankruptcy. And then all of a sudden she gets an offer to become an art consultant for an investor in her husband's business. And what she doesn't know is that her husband and this man have a very gray, shady deal going on. Basically, you can chase my wife and try to seduce her. In return, you give me money. So it's kind of a twist on the 1990s Indecent Proposal, but in this book, the female is the lead and she's much more controlling of the situation because she doesn't know about it. So it was really fun to write, really cool. I usually like to write kind of twisty, morally gray characters. My second book is coming out March too. I guess a lot of us have books coming out in March. What a good month. That's about an astronomy professor who on her worst day goes to a bar and meets a man, and he turns out to be the president of the United States, and he's single. So they start a little secret romance while she's dealing with a whole lot of heavy stuff because I can't write anything light. So, and I am in St. Augustine, Florida.
Perfect, thanks, Jen. Jill?
My name is Jill Davies, and I write dystopian science fiction horror. My debut novel is Due North, and it came out in 2020, and it took a look at what a society that had a long-running virus that caused basically zombies, they're called near dead in the book, how they would manage it if they were just living with it. It's more than 100 years after the apocalypse, society rebuilt, and it focuses on one individual teenager, Kara Mason, who finds herself embroiled in the medical systems and the government systems that are controlling the study and eradication of the virus, and there's so much more going on than she would have thought. So I released that in May of 2020, right when the pandemic was at its height. And so I was like, hey, you know how we have a pandemic? Well, my book has a totally different kind of pandemic, and I didn't plan this. And then I released the sequel to that novel, Into the Deadlands, in October of 2023. And so it is a continuation of that story that takes a look at if one person is given a major task that could change everything, like how can they do that without community, or like how do they find their community to do that? And they're very dystopian, and I think like the zombie virus kind of like tips them toward horror, because you can't really have that kind of like a virus or like those types of creatures in a book without having a little bit of body horror. But they're like right in that intersection of like young adult literature meets like adults that really enjoy reading that type of literature. Like it's right at that intersection. Like I'm not going to call it new adult, because a lot of the times that means that like the characters are adult and the content is specifically adult, and like that's not what we're dealing with. It's just like it's like right at that upper level of YA where like adults engage just as much. And my next novel is called Hearts of a Vanishing City. It's a related standalone, and it takes a look at how you could get such a controlling dystopian society from a world that once had access to information and control of like their own history. And so I am
with the timely books here, like
yeah, I am now releasing a book about censorship and control of information and access to community and communication in this climate. But I promise I am not a prophet, and that book is coming out in May of 2023.
Cool, perfect, thanks Jill. And last but certainly not least, Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Daly. I'm from the west of Ireland, and I write fantasy adventure. So my debut novel was Legacy Bound, which came out in 2023, and it's a sort of a classic fantasy adventure about a prince with a year to live, and he meets an empath named Isabel, but she has to hide who she is because magic is forbidden. And along with her brother William, he's a monk with sort of battling darkness within him, that they go off on an adventure to sort of stop an uprising.
Cool, perfect. I love the like wide range of different genres here and different kinds of stories people are telling. I realised Lydia and I should probably also introduce ourselves. So I'm Lucy A. McLaren. I'm a dark fantasy author. My series that I'm currently, the first two books are out, is the Commune's Curse series, which has got an authoritarian government that's hunting down children with these magic powers, and kind of the four protagonists who are either fighting for or against them, but it's kind of very up and down, and they're switching sides and all sorts. So political as well, and mine was based very much on real life events and like what was going on in my country at the time I wrote it, but also feels very pertinent to what's going on now as well. Lydia, I'll hand over to you.
So I'm a sci-fi author, sci-fi dystopian author. My book Ava is out at the moment, and that is about a woman who is trapped under a barrier that sort of surrounds her city. She's desperate to get out and find out what is on the other side. Book 2 of that is written but needs editing, and I'm also working on a crime series at the moment, so that is currently with some beta readers, and that's like a totally different genre altogether, but I'm actually loving writing that, even more than actually writing sci-fi, if I'm perfectly honest. So yes, that's where I am.
Well, thank you. So we'll dive right into the questions then. So the first one is why did you choose to self-publish? So who would like to jump in on that to start with?
I can go. So I did not want to query a book, which is probably a very common aspect. I knew I wanted to write a book, and I'd been doing a lot of writing on the internet, kind of anonymously, fan fiction, like Reddit posts, like deep fandom analysis, and I knew I wanted to do something original, but querying seemed really like overwhelming, and I was also used to just putting my writing out there, and so I decided to self-publish because of that, because it seemed more accessible. I'm very fortunate that I have the means to hire editors, hire cover designers, so I didn't need kind of that initial funding from a publisher to do all of those things, and so that was my decision to self-publish.
Yeah, I think the self-publishing world has definitely changed a lot as well since I self-published a romancy type thing before that was really a thing in 2017. And I knew that it seems very different now. Like the whole self-publishing world is much more, or the publishing world rather, is more pro self-publishing. I know that when I did it in 2017, it was very much kind of looked down on a little bit. Whereas now I think it's kind of, you're in league with a lot of the traditional publishers, which I think is something that is, freeing to a lot of people.
I can go next. You want? Oh, no. So I've been writing since I was 6, but I never let anybody read what I wrote until a few years ago because I was panicked about it, right? I started writing personal essays in Scary Mommy and Business Insider and stuff, so that kind of opened the door a little bit. I kind of felt a little bit better. But then I joined Women's Fiction Writers Association, and they are very they really help with the process of finding an agent and getting published, right? So I went that way because I didn't have a clue about it. But then it was very clear to me that it was really soul-crushing in so many ways. Like, it basically started to suck the joy out of the writing process for me because I found myself being really doubting my ability, even though I'd gotten a lot of really good feedback. I did get a lot of criticism, but I got a lot of good feedback and stuff. But anyway, it came to a point where I was kind of teetering on self-publishing. I knew some people who had done it and were willing to help and give me advice, and it sort of came to a crossroads. I went to an in-person event and I pitched an agent face-to-face, which was horrifying for me as an introvert inside and out, right? Like, I wanted to throw up. And she said, because we had to pay to pitch her, because everybody's paid to pitch me, I promise I'm giving back feedback, a little bit of personalized feedback. So I sent it in okay, at least I'll get something from somebody who I, was respected. And then 3 weeks later, I got a form rejection from her assistant. And I was like, you know what? That really, I was done. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm tired of waiting for validation from the powers that be. I knew what I had was a good story. I knew how to write a good story at that point. And I closed down, Query Tracker. I stopped following all of the pro-query, pro-agent stuff online because I went kind of into this hole for a few months. It also, what added fuel to that fire was my brother unexpectedly died in May of 2023. And it kind of put into perspective how short this life is, and this whole need to become validated by outside people didn't matter as much anymore. So I just decided I wanted to choose myself instead of waiting for someone to choose me. And I haven't looked back, and I've loved not only the process of self-publishing, but writing. I've gone back to really loving writing and the freedom because, as Lydia said, I've got a domestic suspense that I've also written. I've got all these other genres that I love. It just gives you so much freedom of choice.
Because you may have a fantastic book, but it may not fit in with what is current or popular. And if you can self-publish, then you can get it out there without it needing to be on trend, so to speak. I just think it's great.
When I decided that I was going to publish in 2019, and I just looked at the climate of publishing because I had always imagined that I would want to go the traditional route. But in that time frame from 2011 to the late 2017, 18, 19, we really saw that transformation of the legitimizing of not just indie books, but the pathways to be an indie author, and looking at querying a book and knowing that as a debut I had a best shot of selling a standalone and maybe never finishing that story, and if I did, being completely beholden to tell a story on a traditional publisher, a publishing house's timeline and in their way, versus being able to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And I had a very premature first daughter, and we were in a very medically fragile situation even before the pandemic hit, and I was just looking at the situation and thinking if I went traditional, I might not ever get to finish a series. I might not be able to meet somebody else's deadlines because I don't have that kind of support, and what if something happens? And there were so many resources and like, you know, so much out there that showed like this is how you can do it, this is how you can be, if not successful, like the right steps to take, how to find an editor, how to get your manuscript complete at the, you know, at the industry level. And I just thought like I want to do that, I want to try it at least with this series and then make a decision afterward. And I do feel like it was a right choice, even though I think that the industry has changed, almost completely transformed again, in some ways completely legitimizing it, and in other ways like there are still reach issues, but I don't regret it at all.
Just to add as well, both Lydia and I have been published by small presses, and getting a publishing contract is no guarantee of a book selling or being successful, or the publishing house being I don't know, I guess what you expect, because I published my debut with a small press and was quite naive going into it, and I'm continuing that series as self-published. So you know, you go through that whole stress of querying, the emotional roller coaster that comes with that, and obviously I was very excited to sign with a small press, but it didn't pan out as I would have hoped, and no, that was absolutely gutting. But knowing that the self-publishing route is perfectly legitimate and is so much easier now, and I've got friends that were able to give me advice and kind of point me in the right direction, it does take a huge amount of stress out of like knowing I can just publish the rest of that series on my own, and any future books. The idea of traditionally published like hasn't gone away fully, but it's kind of, you don't have to do it, right? Like, the option of self-publishing is always going to be there.
And like you said, with the small press, I actually made the decision to step away from my publisher in the end because I didn't feel they championed my book very well. I felt that actually I could do more on my own and have more control over sales and when things were put on offer, rather than doing marketing or what I thought was marketing and then finding out 3 months later actually I sold nothing, so that didn't work. So yeah, I actually stepped away in the end.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? The marketing is just a whole other ball game, and we'll be doing a separate panel on that, because you know it's a whole separate topic that is a discussion, but it's a challenge to say the least. So does anyone else want to add in why they chose to self-publish before we move on to the next question?
I'll go if you want me to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I kind of similar to Jen. I did query for, like, I knew it would be a very tough road to get through with the traditional publishing, but I felt like I owed it to myself to at least try it, you know. So I gave myself like 9 to 12 months of just querying, and that was, you know, what I was really focused on, just to see if I got any traction there. But I knew, you know, if that didn't work out, like, I had the indie route, and it was what's been very encouraging to me is like what we've been talking about, is just like how viable it is, because I think, you know, when you think about publishing, I think what the first thing is, you think of that traditional publishing route, because you see so much. That's what you see so often, and especially when I was writing, I wasn't like on Bookstagram. I didn't know the indie world at all. So like, once I did get into that world, and like you see, you know, people are kind of doing it, and it's viable and like legitimate, it was very, very encouraging. So that's kind of how I ended up into that route.
Yeah, and also to say 9 to 12 months, that, you know, in querying terms, that's not long, because the response times could be at least that, right? Like, I've seen people that get responses. I think I had one that was like 2 years after I'd queried and the book was coming out, and I'd signed it with the publisher at that point. It's painful.
Yeah, I definitely got, it was a lot of waiting. I did end up writing most of my second book while I was querying, so that was like really helpful. It also kept me kind of sane while I was doing it. But yeah, like I got like reject. I was like, watch me go through the whole indie publishing route, and then like I get like some agent saying like, hey, I'm interested. But I still got like the rejections like well after I had published. And I was like, oh well, thank you. Yeah. I just knew I didn't want to do it too long, and you know, I wanted to be out there, but I wanted to also say I tried it, basically. So.
Yeah. Elizabeth on this, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can go. So I decided to self-publish. I was coming up to my 40th birthday, and I'd gone years of writing and rewriting and just going around in circles of trying to make it perfect. And it was just sort of, I decided that for my 40th, I wanted to have something published, and doing self-publishing was going to be the way to sort of the smoothest path to get it to it. I have a couple of friends who also self-published, so it sort of had some guidance along the way. I also tried some querying to agents and that. Not even, it was only for a couple of months, but it was just to say that I tried it, to sort of to see that that it was tried at least. And yeah, that was kind of me.
Perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth. And Nick.
Yeah. So when I wrote my first book, I wasn't really even set on putting it out in the world. It was more so I wrote it out of boredom. My wife was in school on the weekends and I worked during the week, so I was home alone. I could only play so many video games on a Saturday and a Sunday, so I started writing. And so I gave it to my uncle, who was in the publishing world. He kind of worked with textbooks and those kind of books, but he really liked it, so he kind of held my hand through, well, let's get an editor, I know somebody, let's talk to some illustrators. So he really kind of got me to the point where I was like, oh, maybe I could put this out there and see what happens. So I did the self-publishing route for that first book, and then I think Dan had mentioned, the Bookstagram and the whole world of an indie author. I was like, there's a lot to learn here, there's a lot to take in. So I started my social media accounts, and I saw all the horror stories on Twitter and on Instagram, and I was like, I don't even want to jump into that. I'll just do my own thing and have the freedom to write what I want and write the stories I want to write, and not have to go through that. It seems like just an emotional gutting to go on the query trail. So I never really got into like, well, maybe I'll try. I was like, no, I'll just stay self-publishing and get my stories out that way. So yeah, that's kind of how I viewed it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think everyone seems to be on the same page, really. It's just that idea of querying is really bloody hard, a huge emotional drain, and also the timeline. Self-publishing is a lot quicker than traditional publishing, because it's just, with traditional publishing, there's so many steps. If you query and find a publisher, great, that kind of shortens the timeline a bit. But if you're querying to find an agent who's then going to put it on submission to find a publisher, you're extending it for potentially years and years. And that's so frustrating when you've got a book that you're excited about and you just want to put it out in the world, right? Like, it's just, you're kind of impatient to get it out there, and self-publishing gives you that control. Cool. Lydia, do you want to do the next question?
Yes. So what are some of the biggest things that you've learnt during the self-publishing journey? What are sort of your top learning points?
It's really a business.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole thing. I mean, I am a one-stop shop business. The production, the post-production, the marketing, and it's all falls on me. At first, that was really daunting, but I kind of started to get excited about it because I could do what I wanted. The freedom of self-publishing is it really energizes me when I think about it, because traditional publishing, I know a lot of writers have to do marketing themselves anyway, so I thought it's just kind of like, well, if I'm going to do all that, why don't I just take it all for myself and write what I want to write on my timeline. And so I really learned that it's a business, and I had to kind of change my mindset to making it such. It's not just a hobby, and it's not just me sitting back and falling into my stories. I have to be responsible for every step of it. And I kind of, like I said, flipped it into it being a more energizing thing instead of a weighted kind of decision. So
yeah, I had a similar kind of awakening, because I published my first book and I was like, all right, cool, here come the sales, and I had no marketing plan, I had no anything. So that was a big learning curve, to put yourself out there, get the social medias going. Self-promoting felt strange to me at first. It still kind of does, but so that whole learning curve of, there's the writing process, and then there's the marketing and the the kind of the brand recognition that you got to get out there for yourself. So that was a big, and still is a big learning curve for me.
I think that's what you mentioned, like the self-promotion is like one of the things that was, I don't know if it's like a learning, but it's like one of the things that was the hardest for me, because I just feel like I'm very proud of this thing, but I just naturally don't want to just like brag about it. Like I wouldn't go to parties like, hey guys, I wrote a book. Like I wait for it to come up, and I'm like, okay, I'll talk to you about it. So like churning to be like, you have to be your biggest like fan of the work. Because I always downplay it, like, just naturally, like, even though I am obviously very, very happy with it. So you have to kind of get into that mindset of being, like, shouting about it in a way. And that, I think, is kind of the hardest switch for me to have had to do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'd have people be like, oh, I heard you wrote a book. And I'd be like, yeah. Yep. You know, like, and that was it. You know?
Yeah, and the worst question ever was, so tell me about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like,
I really have to tell you about it?
Yeah.
Book, it's got stuff.
Yeah. I'll text you the link. You can read about it. How about that? Yeah.
It's funny that we're all similar. I mean, that's why Lydia and I set this up, right? Because it's most authors that I know are introverts, and there's that real hurdle of learning to talk about your book, to not feel really awkward if someone asks you about it, and it's something you really have to practice, isn't it? Because it's just, even though you've written this thing, it just as soon as anyone asks that question, what's it about, boop, like mind blank, gone, no idea what are sentences, I don't know. It's so interesting that so many people who are introverts are drawn towards this. You know, I guess the act of writing itself is quite introverted, isn't it? You know, you're in your own head, you're creating these worlds and characters. But then, alongside that, if you want it to sell, the self-promotion has to come.
I think it's also being really persistent as well. And so I try to get my book in as many bookstores as possible, and to do book events. And first of all, bookstores are very busy, and they're also not people who, like, I work in the corporate world as a day job, so I'm used to 20-minute responses on emails, and bookstores do not live in that world. They're like, we will get back to you in 2 weeks on emails. And it's like blows my mind, because if you're not getting back to me in like 48 hours, I'm like, they've forgotten about me. And so shifting that mindset, but also being very persistent and being very just kind of staying on them. And that's very hard, because you're like, okay, I don't want to be annoying, but if I'm not kind of constantly checking in, if I'm not, sometimes making a call, I'm just not going to get that response from bookstores, from book festivals, because it's like they've got a million people they're dealing with, and then you're like a very small fish in a big pond. So just trying to get that time is, I think, one of the hardest things that I've learned.
And have you managed to get your books into bookstores and to find places to sell books?
Yeah, so I am in a few bookstores, actually in Boston alone. So Trident is a big bookstore in Back Bay, and then I'm also in Lovestruck, which is a new romance bookstore, and then in Cambridge, which has been a huge opening. And then I'm in a lot of bookstores that I don't know about. So I've sold not a ton of copies, but about 80 books to bookstores nationally. So I know I'm in a couple in California, I'm in a couple in Seattle. So I emailed about 1,500 bookstores. Which is a really long journey on how I got there. But yeah, so I have been successful, and I'm hoping I've refined that for this next book, I'll start that process in about a week, that it'll be even better this time around.
That's super impressive.
Yeah, 1,500, that must have taken quite a chunk of time. But it's worth it to get your book in the stores, isn't it? Because then that's, it's more people seeing them. But that's where you said the persistence comes in, because you just got to keep pushing it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I'd say the dominant thing that I've learned in the process of indie publishing is that, there are tons of resources of people that can talk about what they did and give advice on here are options and resources, or if I could do it again, this is what I do. And for me, I'm a very literal person, and so I would take that information and be like, this is what you do, or this is how to avoid this pitfall. And there's no such thing. anybody that says, like, if I could do it again, I'd do X, like, it's not really true, because you have to go through the process of doing it. Like, you don't, I mean, like, once in a while, like, we all see the person, the one in, 4.6 billion that writes a book and puts it out there, and book one becomes incredibly visible and incredibly successful. And we all see them because they're visible, but, like, that's not what it's like. You slog through, you publish a book, and then you don't know how to sell it. You write another book, and you learn how to build community. And I think that that's really, like, a huge part of my journey, is just, like, trusting that I have to go on a learning journey, and I have to build my business and build my audience, and there's no shortcut around it. I start at 0 and can count 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 400, like up to your first 400 book sales, or, like, whatnot. Like, it's a journey, and there's not any one piece of advice or one technique or one strategy that makes it easier. And I think that, like, once I accepted that, like, I am going to take the time that I take, and I'm going to be the small fry that I am, and slowly but surely keep working on it, and that's how I'll see the success. And it's not going to be, I mean, who doesn't wish that they'd wake up one day having gone viral for their book and suddenly everybody's talking about it? Like, we all wish that, but, like, what I plan on is this, like, slow, steady build. And once I really understood that that's what it was going to look like, so much pressure came off in, like, learning how to be an author and market myself and set goals. And like, that's the big learning piece, I think, that makes it a sustainable journey. Is it's a journey, it's a business, and it's one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. You're not constantly just trying to hit a lottery.
Yeah, absolutely, because there is no cheat code to it. Apart from, the occasional ones that you see on BookTok, for example, that's made a few debut authors explode, but that's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. You can do the same as what those authors did. There's absolutely no guarantee of sales in the slightest. And it's, I think, about finding what works for you, isn't it? Because I remember when I first joined the writing community on Twitter, less said about that the better, but it was like this whole, like, follow for follow culture, so I kind of quickly amassed thousands of followers. But then I was like, this literally is meaningless, because these people aren't engaging with what I'm posting. There's no actual interest in my writing. It's just they just want to follow back. So then I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, on Instagram, I don't have that kind of. I will always follow back fellow authors, but I'm not just doing follow trains and stuff like that, because they just don't work. Is my experience anyway. It's kind of people that want to follow you and, like, are genuinely interested in your work are the ones that you actually want to find, right? And that's, like, there's always that thing of find your reader, and that phrase kind of hurts my head, because I kind of just think, like, what's my ideal reader? I don't I still don't truly understand that. I'm still trying to work that out, but yeah, it is definitely, like you said, Jill, one step at a time. What about you, Elizabeth? Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just sort of to echo what everyone else is saying, like the marketing efforts, it's you get in what you put out, or you put out what you get in, whichever way you want to say it. The effort and time, it only gets what you have sort of put into it. And it was that sort of big learning curve of, if I do nothing like that, waiting for the sales to roll in once you hit publish, and it's just not happening, and then you're like, oh, okay, I actually have to see it, just to see the ranking of, like, my book is now a couple of million in the ranking because there's nothing happening with it, and then trying to figure out what to do, and sort of trying to find resources in that, and trying to sort of try different things and learn that new set of skills. That the writing part was sort of almost the easy part. And then it was sort of learning after that to sort of this whole new section, which I was highly uncomfortable and still am highly uncomfortable with, trying to sort of sell myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's I don't know about everyone else, but I've published 2 books. Got another one coming out this year, but I still feel like I'm not really sure what I'm doing, or like any marketing attempt is kind of a shot in the dark. But just keep slugging away, really, is my main aim. Is there anything you'd do differently, do you think, going forward, in your future books?
I probably would have planned a little bit better. I'm not a planner. I mean, I like to pretend I'm a planner with certain things, but I am not a planner. I kind of just go by gut and intuition with stuff. So I probably would have, and then I go back. I'm like a backwards outliner. So I probably would have tried to find this groove that I'm in now a little bit sooner and planned a little bit better. Because I know one day this whole working under pressure and pulling something out at the last minute is going to fail me. I don't now. And now that it's like my business, I really don't want it to come down to that. But I think, and I would have started probably sooner, for sure.
Yeah, I think the planning part, just to sort of prep beforehand of what sort of the time and effort that you want to put out, and sort of have that sort of set up that you want to put in this much effort to try and sort of build up your community and that, and try and find those people, and just to practice, see what works for you and see what doesn't. I know, like, I was looking at all these amazing, TikToks and all this sort of stuff of how people were trying different stuff, and I was sort of trying to do it, and it just wasn't me. It doesn't suit who I am, and it's just like, it sort of just comes across as very fake or false, and I was like, I just be more authentic to myself and find out what suits me, sort of experiment and stuff like that.
I think that's the thing with social media, because there's so much that you can join, right? I've joined all of them, but have taken a step back from stuff like TikTok and Facebook, and just use what works for you. Don't feel like you have to be on every platform. I think that's something that I would do differently, because I felt like I had to be on everything and like posting regularly, and it takes so much from you. And my experience is it's very mentally draining and takes away from what you're actually wanting to do, which is writing, and it like drains the energy that you have for that. So that's something I'm trying to implement this year, is just take a step back from social media. Yeah, be more mindful of the planning.
Yeah, no, I always begrudge the amount of time that you feel you should spend doing that when you could be writing. Would rather be writing.
Yeah, I made a TikTok account a couple months ago, and I've posted 0 videos because I started looking like, okay, what are other people doing? And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's not. I'm just going to do videos of myself. No way. So yeah, that's something I've learned is, like Lucy said, pick your spot. I find Twitter really easy. I just have a random thought about something I'm writing and just take 30 seconds, send it out, and then move on. Because yeah, the time spent away from writing gets frustrating when you're like, I don't want to be making this pretty picture with, like, I don't want to do that. I just want to get something out there so people see that I'm alive and I'm working on things, but I'd like to go work on those things now,
I think that's interesting too, is how visual you're supposed to be trying to sell a book. So like, I'm sure we all have like Canva subscriptions that we live on. And like, when I first started, I was using Photoshop, and I learned Photoshop in like 2006 in high school. And so I abandoned that because it was really bad. But I'm not a visual person. Like, I'm a writer. I don't do visual art. Again, like I said, I have like a corporate job that involves a lot of Excel during the day. Nothing about me wants to sit down and draw and create visuals and create pretty pictures. Like, even my like PowerPoints suck at work. And so the fact that like that is part of the job, I think, is like the hardest part, which I know is not necessarily the question wrong, but that's the hardest part for me, because it just like, I am like anti-visual in how I market, and having to get on that has been really, really hard.
Yeah. I think the thing that has benefited me the most, that I plan to continue to do moving forward, is connecting with more authors doing what I'm doing. So like, it can't just be anybody. It's got to be somebody that like you connect with, and like hopefully like compatible genre. But like, ever since I have specifically put a lot of energy into actually building community with fellow indie authors, I have experienced like it's been transformative, and not just like my work, but like my attitude. And like, while it hasn't like suddenly skyrocketed my sales or anything like that, like having that support, like where I can, shout out to the group chat, I am thinking about doing this thing. And they can be like, oh, when I did it, I did this. Or, oh, send the video my way and, I'll boost it. And like, it just suddenly makes you feel not alone. And then there becomes like a resource sharing, right? Where like, I am better at like the graphic visual aspect of things because, I had I had careers before this. And like, one of them was like, I was a teacher and like, boy, you got to be visual if you're a teacher, right? So like, I kind of like do okay with the graphics, and then like I had an author friend who's like, I can't even like, I open Canva and I collapse. How did you do that thing? And I was just like, oh, let me do it for you. And so like then it suddenly becomes like not just an emotional support, because writing and marketing yourself can feel very isolating. So like it's an emotional resource, but then suddenly you become a pool of like-minded people that has resources to share. And sometimes that resource is like, I've had writer's block for 2 months, and somebody will say, send it over to me and we'll talk about it. And like that, how many of us like finding somebody that wants to read your work, like as you're developing it, like it's very vulnerable and it's very hard to find somebody that's willing to spend that time. But like when it's a community and it's a pool of resources, it's better.
Yeah, I think that's one positive that's come from social media for myself, is meeting so many other authors. From that, it's, Lydia and I have met through that. We're both in a Discord group called the FSF Writers Alliance, which is just all fantasy and sci-fi writers, and that's, again, it's that community. It's that, because finding stuff like beta readers can be so challenging, especially like Jill said, finding people that are dedicated and will put the time in and give you the feedback. Because I've had multiple times of being ghosted by people who said they would read it, and that's really frustrating. When you know there's a community there that's willing to kind of provide that support, then it's really reassuring.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found just so encouraging is like, especially when I was starting, and like even just like navigating, like how do you like format this, like what did you use to format your like software. Like I would just reach out to random indie authors that I met on Instagram, and like all of them were just filled with advice, which was like very, very cool. Because yeah, otherwise you're navigating it, you're just like blindly going. So you're just like, all right, what did you use Amazon, did you use Ingram Spark, like what was the downfalls of this, like, so there's people who are like slightly ahead of you in the journey who can like kind of shine back what they're seeing, and it's a very nice community.
Absolutely, it's invaluable, really, just having that ability to speak to people who have been there before. Lydia, do you want to do the next question?
So yeah, would any of you consider traditional publishing in the future, or are you solely sticking with self-publishing?
My answer is, if Berkeley Romance called me tomorrow and said, we're going to give you a 3-book deal and we're going to like make it a thing, absolutely. Like, yes, Berkeley Romance, please call me. But if I have to sit and like query if it's going to be a situation where it is like all of the uncertainties of traditional publishing, no. But if there's someone's like, yeah, do you want a publishing contract, I'm not going to say no.
Yeah, because the thing is, you can get offered contracts off the back of your self-published books. We've seen it. People like Ryan Cahill, for example, get massive off the back of their self-published books, and then are offered a contract that way. Of course, not saying that's going to happen for everyone, but it's a possibility, right? Like it feels a bit like right place, right time in terms of that kind of genre of book being popular, and it takes off.
Yeah, I kind of echo that. Like, I don't think I would query again, unless like 10 years from now, maybe. But I don't see myself in the very near future querying again. But yeah, if someone came to me, I'd hear them out.
I think I have ultimate goals of being hybrid. I will never leave indie publishing completely behind, because I think it's so valuable, and it creates an avenue for like the parts of our voices that will never fit in the industry, and also gives us like a creative control and an outlet that we would never have through traditional publishing, but I do have interest in, and like I say that as somebody who has not at this point done any querying, I've not been in the trenches, but I have a vision of like, I want to write some like straight horror books that are like, just horror genre, and I have an intention of like, once I go that route, to try and go traditional with it and to keep my other stuff indie and like be hybrid. And obviously whether or not that works out and whether or not that changes and where my career goes, but from somebody, there was an editor in the industry that was talking about like the exchange of traditional publishing, where like traditional publishing won't make you overnight famous and it won't make you necessarily incredibly successful. In fact, most mid-list books get thrown out and have no backing, and those authors, remain as unknown as anyone else for the duration of their career. It's like it was like a power of 10. So like, if you have an audience reading your book of 1,000 people and you become a traditionally published author, that like imprint will give you an exposure times 10. So like now, instead of reaching 1,000 people, you have the opportunity to reach 10,000 people. You have an audience of 10,000 people, suddenly you have an audience of 100,000 people. And so like, I think of it as like a good career direction if I can, like write the correct novel, like by the time I finish a novel, have there be a market for it, and get it into the trenches, get into the trenches at the right time. But like, I see it as something that could potentially help amplify like my voice and my work. And so I do think that I'd like to attempt to be hybrid one day.
Yeah, but I think being hybrid is more accepted now, because I feel like there was a time when being self-published meant that traditional, perhaps agents or traditional publishers wouldn't consider an author, but it seems to be a lot more accepted now that you can have self-published and still also go down the traditional route as well.
I suppose for me, I'd be more curious as to see what the traditional publishers could offer in terms of like guidance or, sort of just editing, just to see what the difference is between that and self-publishing, to see, like that, just differences. I'd be curious to see like marketing strategies. I know some, like you were saying, it doesn't really happen for the smaller ones, but even just the bigger one, how do they get their books out and their reach, like Jill was saying. I'd be more curious, but I don't think I'd ever leave self-publishing, more the hybrids. But I would query again just to get over the fear of it more than expect anything to happen from it. It's just to get rid of that fear.
It's like I got PTSD from querying. Like, everyone's like, no, can't do it again.
I think I would be open to it, but I'd want to retain kind of my creative control. Part of my fear of going traditional would be you get an agent and they find a publisher who's willing to publish your book, and they're like, hey, we love your story, but we want you to change this, this, and that. And I don't, if it's silly little things, maybe, but if they want to tweak core elements of the story, I think I would be, I wouldn't want that kind of weird pressure where it's like, hey, I could go traditional, but I'd have to switch and change what I actually felt like writing. I wouldn't. So it'd have to be kind of the Goldilocks perfect scenario, I think, to go traditional. Hybrid maybe, but it'd have to be. I'd have to have that kind of in writing, like, no, you're not going to mess with my story beyond, editing and maybe pacing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's fair enough, because that is, like we've said, such a big appeal of self-publishing is retaining creative control.
Yeah, I think we've all thought of at some point that Publishers Marketplace announcement of, hey, you got bought by HarperCollins in a 3-book deal, really nice, really big deal, like, okay. But like Nick was saying, and I think all of us think, like the give and take, not only, I don't want to change major things in the way I write and the stories I write and the characters I write. I was talking to some friends, before I went this route, and we were talking about, like, well, what would you do to your story if an editor at a major publishing house said, change it? What would we do? And most of them were like, oh, I'd change it. And I was like, when it came to me, I was like, I don't know. I'd have a hard time changing certain things because I think it takes away from the story. So I think I would go hybrid at some point, maybe, but I think I'm okay just hanging out, doing my own thing, running my own business, and that kind of thing. But I mean, again, my husband would be very happy if I got paid 6 figures for a book. He'd be like, I could never tell him if that was on the table. Honestly, it would have to be like, because he would be like, don't you dare turn that down. But anyway, and my daughter too. She would be horrified. But yeah, I think I like where I am.
Yeah, I would. One thing I would echo, because like kind of what your point, like with the monetary aspect. I think one thing that's like appealing with the traditional is like, this is like very pipe dream, but like writing full time, it feels like that's where you'd be able to do that. Because like ideally, I enjoy writing, love it to be the full-time job, not have the day job. So I think that's where you see the traditional publishing as that's probably more likely there. Or if you're doing so well in the indie space that you're able to do that full time, then it's like probably a traditional publisher will approach you at that point, I would imagine. But if you're still working your day job and you're doing this as a hobby, then like, yeah, the traditional publishing, it doesn't sound as appealing because now you have all these other things that are getting in the way when you already you're pressed for time. You're trying to do this as a hobby. So that's where I think, like, if it's not going to change my, day to day and not let me have the financial freedom to write during the daytime as my job, then it kind of does lose its appeal to some degree too, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So next question. I feel like we probably touched upon this a little bit with the earlier about what have you learned, but what advice would you give to someone who's setting out on the self-publishing journey? So, Jill, you've spoken a lot about resources and those being available online. So have any of you kind of given advice to other authors and set them on in a certain direction? Or
I can go with the kind of the advice I've been giving a lot of people right now is to don't get off of Amazon. As much as like I would love to give that advice, it's not practical, but think about diversifying from Amazon. So make sure your books aren't only on Amazon. Get them on Ingram, even if you're on Kindle Unlimited and can't do other ebooks. Get a print copy on Ingram. You can start to market to bookstores that way. And then also you're not as stuck in like the algorithm of Amazon and you're not chasing that. And don't chase the Amazon algorithm. Like Amazon has an algorithm that's going to be an impossible chase. Like you're going to have to find another avenue. So, and also just don't chase the algorithm in general.
Yeah, that can just drive you nuts, right?
Yeah, I'd say, well, first of all, I'd say if you're still writing, just write and have fun. Just ignore everything that comes after. Just write the book. But after that, it's sort of find a community. As you were saying, you don't feel alone anymore, and it's nice to have people to support you and sort of help and like, shine that light backwards, as you were saying. And then I think just sort of try and get it as professional as possible to put it out there, do the research into it once you're ready for it to have it put out and try and get it as good as you can.
Also, just to echo that, like publishing, writing, whether you're traditional or indie, it is not a get-rich-quick scheme. I call it a get-poor-slow scheme. Because it is expensive to put books out, and I spend way more on my books than I will likely ever make. And I think when you look online, especially, I spend a lot of time on like Reddit getting information. I don't know if anyone else has been there. It can be a rough place, but there are always people who are like, "I'm going to make all this money off my book," and you're like, "No, you're not." Like it's not like. There's a whole cottage industry out there of people who their grift is telling people that they can make money off of a book, but they're making money telling people they can make money off of a book. Like that is a scam. And a lot of people don't understand that. Like this is not a money-making venture. This is a money-spending venture.
I think writers and creatives in general are a huge target for a lot of people to make money off of us because we live in dreams. And so we want to fulfill our dream any way we can. And so when we see those things and get, take my class, spend $750 for my class on how to build your email newsletter. And it's like, we just kind of, we tend to fall more into that. So my advice, and I've told a lot of people, is don't fall into that trap of feeling like you need to pay so much. There are so many resources out there. Get what you can for free or from other people that you know and trust before you start investing widely in that, because you have so much other stuff you have to invest in this self-publishing journey. I've spent money on workshops, and I'm like, I can't believe I just spent $100 on this and I got like nothing out of it that I didn't know already. So it's just kind of find your community. That's always my number one thing, as Jill has said, like we just keep saying, and then just keep going and don't let the overwhelm. I've told a couple people who have decided to go the self-publishing route after I did, don't let the overwhelm suck you in. Just make your list and just start with one thing at a time and chip away, and it will become easier to get through.
One thing I found just like so important, and I think some of the best advice I got, because like when I was early on, I was trying to figure out how to do like the advanced reader copies and stuff like that, and like because I just saw on Bookstagram people talking about arcs and everything like that. And I was like, my first conception was like, oh, I'll send out like 10 of them. And like the first, like one of the indie authors I talked to was like, you need to pump those numbers up. So as many arcs as you can possibly send is kind of might be my top advice, because like you're only going to get maybe 30% if you're lucky to go through and read them, which is, a totally reasonable number and makes sense. Like people get busy and everything like that. So whatever you think you need, you just want to get more of it. So that was kind of like the most interesting thing, especially for a debut and just starting out. So like get it into people's hands, I think.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing would just be we've said community, but don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're not sure of something, I did it for my first book. I was like, no, I'll figure it out. I'll just go on Google till 3 a.m. and and so I kind of slogged through it, and it made the publishing and the marketing process kind of miserable for my first book, because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm just treading water. So yeah, so if you have a community, or you find someone who you trust, or even just, I've randomly just messaged people on Instagram or on Twitter, and I'm like, hey, I've seen your post. You seem reasonable. Would you want to take a look at this? Or have you done? I saw you do like a YouTube channel. Hey, would you be interested in looking at this book? I just wrote it. So it took me a while to get there, but don't be afraid to reach out to people in the indie space, writers or the Bookstagram people or that kind of promoter people. Because the worst thing they do is they say, no, I can't really help you, and you're right where you're anyway. And best case, they offer some advice, and you feel a lot better about where you're at.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, because Bookstagrammers are there to help really with these kinds of things. My experience has been, whenever I've reached out and asked about an ARC book being read, being quite excited and happy to help. You always get people that aren't going to respond. There's bigger accounts that are, of course, probably inundated with authors contacting them. But it's building that connection, isn't it? Having that network of people that, especially if you're writing a series and there's someone that's interested in book one, then the potential likelihood is they're going to want to read the rest of the series as well.
Yeah, I think I would say to set monetary goals. Like, you have to be striving for something that is not related to business to build this business, because actually turning it into any amount of business is so long term that I think you lose your longevity along the way. Like, what did they say? Like, less than 1%, like 80% of the population wants to write a book. Less than 1% of those people actually write the book. And less than, 0.06% of them write more than one. The numbers, shrink down to, and I think that speaks to, the ability to withstand the longevity of the career is, if you don't have non-monetary goals, you just aren't going to be able to keep going out there. There's got to be an internal drive that isn't everybody sees me as successful or I'm making tons of money, because, finding that thing that pushes you is the only thing that's going to get it. And then the other advice that I would give is, like, we've all heard the statement, like, comparison is the thief of joy. Like, if you see an author talking about their book, you're seeing an author that has reach. And that is random, and that is the smallest percent of the publishing population. But because they're who we see, and especially who we see most often, are the most visible, if we compare ourselves to that, like, we can, like, ruin our day. Like, oh, I see the person who published their first book and sold 6,000 on their release week. I'm going to feel bad about my sales compared to that, but I see that happening because it's an anomaly. And so, like, it's so easy to compare ourselves to those numbers. And then, like, you know, people who are posting their success online are posting their success because they want to share their success. And so, like, then you're going to compare yourself to a curated, like, group of people who are uniquely, like, being successful in these ways. And so, like, if you compare yourself to that at your stage, I think that it can be really discouraging. And, like, you'll think, oh, I'm doing something wrong. Whereas, like, there is no wrong. Failure is part of the journey. Like, not being there is part of the journey. You don't get to the part where you're well established and sharing those things without having to start at the beginning. And so, like, I think that, like, kind of keeping that as a reminder and, like, keeping yourself in your own journey is a huge part of, like, being able to, like, sustain this, like, you know, to sustain the indie career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can easily burn yourself out if you're kind of diving in this, expecting a huge amount of monetary return, and, like, the disappointment and the comparison to other people, seeing other people's successes can be very disheartening. But also, other authors aren't your competition ultimately. Like, people are, you're seeing successes, you're not seeing those people's journeys towards that and the ups and downs they've probably had. And it's just, you know, they're not getting that because you're not. They're getting that because their book was in the right place at the right time and it found, you know, there's a particular genre that's very popular right now, for example. You know, you can't let it get to you because, like we said earlier, the writing is the most important thing here. And to lose your joy of that because of everything external to it is really sad.
And people lie on Instagram and TikTok. Like, or even if they're not lying, like, they're putting an outward persona that they are doing great. And I say that as someone who does that myself, where I'm like, I had a great year as a writer, and in a lot of ways I did, but I did not sell very many books. And that's okay. That's not the goal right now. But I think when you look at other people's, like, Instagram, it's like everyone had a great year and I didn't. And then go again, I know I keep talking about Reddit, but look at our self-publishing. No one had a great year there. Everyone had a great year on Instagram. It's probably the same people. And so when you've got that anonymity and the people who are venting versus when you've got that, like, marketing phase, you're going to have, like, a very different, like, outlook on that. And so that's my other piece of advice too. Like, people are creating a curated, like Jill said, a curated look of who they are as an author, and they're only showing the good things in their life. And that is just social media, right? Like, people are curating this, like, you know, really fancy lifestyle, and that's just not reality in any scope, and that includes, like, Bookstagram or Book Talk.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so if you can let us know then where we can follow you and stay up to date with your latest books. Jen, do you want to start?
I'm on Instagram, Jen Sinclair Writes. I have a Facebook author page, Jen Sinclair Author, and then I've got my website, which has everything, which is just jensinclair.com, maybe? Isn't this awful? I'm so bad. I'm so not prepared. This is why I need to plan better, guys. Yeah. You can find, I mean, if you find one of those places, you can find all the other places.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jen. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Elizabeth Daly Author. Also, same website. I think it's .com as well. So, and that's about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at McPherson Writes, and then my website is McPhersonWrites.com. So
Perfect, thank you. Dan?
Yes, my main one is Instagram. It's DH Hoskins with underscores, but I think if you just write DH Hoskins, it'll get you there. So mainly I'm on Instagram. I do have a website as well, dhhoskins.com, but Instagram's probably the best one.
Cool. MJ?
Yeah, so Instagram at MJ Etkind author, and then Substack, so mjetkind.substack.com.
Thank you. And Jill?
Jill and Davies Books on Instagram and TikTok and Blue Sky, but like Jill and Davies Books Blue Sky, right? And my website is jillanddavies.com, and I am currently doing ARC signups on all of my links for my current book. So anybody that wants to join the ARC team for my May release is welcome to. I think I'm Jill and Davies Books on all my socials now, with the underscore between Jill and Davies and books.
Perfect, thank you so much. And you can follow Lydia and I on Instagram at Introverted Indies. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been really great chatting. So thank you very much, everyone.